Hi, my name is Paul Vander. I'm the pastor of Livingstone's Christian Reformed Church, and I'm starting a new course that I'm entitling Parenting Through Adulthood. When I was doing a grief share class, I began to notice that increasingly a number of our conversations were turning towards the relationships that many of the people had with their adult children. And the more we talked about this, the more I realized that I've never done a class on this. I've never seen a class done on this. And this would probably be about one of the most important things that we can talk about with respect to the relationship lives of our people. In fact, I once had a conversation with a therapist who told me, she said, there are a lot of courses for parenting young children, parenting school-age children, parenting teenage children, but there's almost nothing out there that deals with parenting adult children. And so I thought, well, why don't we have a conversation about this? And so, as often is the case, the good people of Livingstone's are my guinea pigs, and so we're going to have a course on this and see what we can do. Now, part of the reason that this is so hard is that human beings are enormously complex. And when your child was small, the problems were small. Now that your children are large and grown, they have big problems. They have problems at work. They might have problems in their own relationships. They might have problems in their marriage. They might have problems with finances. They might have health problems. All of this just creates tremendous complexity, and because there are few relationships in our life that are as integral and foundational as parent-child relationships, our relationships with our adult children are going to be very, very complicated. And so it stands to reason that, these relationships are going to be difficult. Now, this class is for anyone who the class is going to focus on, obviously, people who have children who are over the age of 18 or 21. But all of us are children of parents, and these relationships have impacted us all. So even if you don't have any children, or even if your children are young, you might find benefit in this class, and you are certainly welcome to participate and to come along for us on the ride. Now, I decided to entitle this Parenting Through Adulthood because right away we have a language problem. If we called our children offspring, well, that's a little biological. If we call our adult children children, we infantilize them in some ways, and they're not children. And the whole purpose of the class is because, in fact, they are adults, and our lives are complex, and the relationships are complex. So I will, in fact, call them children, but I don't mean to disrespect them or diminish them by calling them children. It's just I don't really have a better word for them. Also because we are always parenting, and even if your child is thriving and fully mature, we will always be their parents, and they will always be our children. Now, again, part of what's complex about this is that often as we get older, the roles change. And as if you're the parent and you're growing older and you're having health concerns or there are issues of dementia, often the children take on the parenting role, and this gets very complicated. Another reason I kind of like this title is because as our children get older, you can't just sit down and talk to them. You don't have control over their lives. You can't take away their cell phones or take away their driving privileges. A lot of how we're going to parent in this mode will, in fact, be through modeling. And a lot of the issues we will run into is because we're not acting like adults. We're not being mature in our relationships with them. And so parenting through adulthood both means that we parent them through adulthood, but we also parent by being adults ourselves. And so a lot of this course will talk about how we should be and what it means for us to be mature and grown up in our relationships with others. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this being a Christian course. Now, obviously, these problems and these issues go far beyond simply Christianity. Part of why I want to address this is that sometimes Christians reduce the scope of our interests and the scope of our purview by saying, well, our only interest is in guiding the religious lives or the spiritual lives of our children. And I find that definitely not to be the case. Even if your child has embraced your own religious tradition or your child has rejected your religious tradition, you as a parent are going to be worried about all aspects of your child. And I think this, in fact, is appropriately Christian because God didn't just give us little on-off switches to be one religion or another. God put us in this world, and as a reformed pastor, I believe the purpose of this life, including our relationship with Christ, is in fact to flourish within his creation towards actually the new creation. So we're really going to work hard on trying not to simply reduce this to a conversation about whether or not our children will share our Christian faith. I want to use the term flourishing here because I think it sets it up right. When we look at plants, you can't actually cause a plant to grow. What you do is you provide the proper context for that plant to achieve its potential. Now, if it's a short plant, it'll be short. If it's a tall plant, it'll be tall. But all you can really do is work on the environment and work on the situation. Now, that's been true from the moment you started parenting, from the moment your child was conceived and you had any relationship with that child. And so what we're really looking for from our children and hoping for our children is, in fact, flourishing. And so that will be the dominant image we look at. Now, it's also the case that in this life and in this world, we struggle. And it may be that your child will struggle all of their life with something. Your child might be disabled. Your child, in fact, might have died young, and you're continuing to deal with those issues and the relationships around this child. Your child might be disabled. What does that mean for your relationship with that child, especially given the fact that in all likelihood you might die before your child does, and you're concerned about the care of your child after you die? And so again, we can see that this conversation is very broad and impacts a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. And so, in fact, we will, while looking for flourishing, also probably spend most of our time talking about struggling. Now, in order to set the stage, I want to begin with the creation story, because if we're going to ask the question about our child's flourishing, we have to ask the question about what it means to be a human being. When I was growing up in Christian school, I learned that this verse was called the cultural mandate. This kind of sets out the purview of what it means to be a human being. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God created them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Right away, God is setting us up to, in fact, be like him, to create in this world, to flourish in this world, to participate in this world. And so what we really want from our children is for them to meet their potential as culture makers, as creative people in the world, as people who do as God does in Genesis 1, who speak order into chaos. Now, this in fact may be your role as a parent. You might be called to speak order into the chaos of your adult child's life. It may be that your adult child isn't interested in hearing anything you have to say, but yet you'll have to deal with the questions of how, in the ways that your life comes into contact with theirs, you can in fact bring order and blessing and flourishing into their lives to the degree possible. And this gets into the question of what we want in terms of our children's lives. What we really want are for them to flourish. Now, the process of this course, every session that we have of this course, on the church website, you can see that we're having our first session this Sunday. And if you can join us, you can find further information on the church website. But every class will have a teaching component. I'll actually roughly go through the stuff I'm going through on this video. There will be time for the group discussion, and I'll talk about discussion in a moment, and there'll be time for self-work or homework, and I'll be talking about that as well. I do want to talk a little bit, though, first about emotions, because I often find in working through courses like this, there are a lot of assumptions about emotions that I don't think are well-founded or true. And so I'll just lay my cards on the table and tell you what I think. I think emotions are signals. They may be coming from the parts of your mind that are not under your conscious control. This is in fact why when we have negative emotions, we can't simply turn them off. They're in there. I don't think emotions should be our masters. I think God can speak to us through our emotions, but I also think it's erroneous to imagine that every single emotion we have is God speaking to us. Emotions are signals, and we should discern them. We should work through them. We should listen to them and also evaluate them. Sometimes we might have an emotion that really doesn't belong. We might feel guilty about something that we really shouldn't feel guilty about. We might be experiencing loss, and we're going to have to figure out what to do with that. We might experience regret. This is very common in terms of parents thinking about their relationship with their children. And sometimes those regrets move us to do things that actually aren't helping our children. And so throughout this course, we're going to talk about emotions. And again, my position is that emotions are signals. We need to listen to them. We need to evaluate them. We need to discern them. We need to process them. But they are not our masters, even as they are also not our slaves. A big part of this course is going to talk about prayer. Now, prayer is one of the chief ways that we commune with God, and prayer is also a way that we process our emotions with God. If you read the Psalms, you'll find that the psalmists process their raw emotions to God, and that's about the best way to be. Now, you might not be a Christian, and you might be an agnostic or an atheist, and you might say, well, I don't think about prayer, and I don't pray, and I don't want to talk about prayer, which is certainly your right. But I would suggest that, in fact, prayer is emotionally healthy, because what you probably don't want to do is burden your adult child with all of your emotional work. That's probably not the place to burden. You might share emotions with your child, but you can take your emotions to God, and you can process your emotions with God. And in fact, this, I think, will be a major part of the self-work or the homework that we do. I want to make a couple of notes about discussion. Often in a class like this, it's very helpful for us to share our own realities, our own emotional experiences. But in a class like this, there's a danger, because probably some of what's bringing us to this class is our frustration with our adult children. And so I'd just like to say that it's important in the context of this class to not share with the rest of the group what you imagine your adult child would not want shared with the rest of the group. Usually with a group like this, we make a common agreement that we're not going to share outside the group. But also in a group like this, there's no coercion to share. There are a lot of things in relationships that are sensitive and delicate. These might be things you only share with a trusted friend, or with your pastor, or with a therapist, or maybe a spouse, or maybe in fact it's something you only share with your child. And I think that's appropriate. The other point I want to make is that we should be careful with advice giving. I've also often found in a group like this, some people get quick about telling others what they should do. Now, I don't think advice giving is always bad, but we should be a little careful with it. Most of the time, people usually don't take our advice or follow through anyway, and often advice giving is actually kind of a strange way to vent. It would be more healthy to simply say, this is my opinion, or this is what I'm feeling, or this is what I've discovered, rather than, in fact, trying to get someone else to do something because you're so sure that's the right thing they do. Again, it's not always a bad thing, and there is a place for it, but we should be a little careful with it. The main reason for the group, though, is so that you know you're not alone. Again, I find that in this area, there's a lot of shame, there's regret. Often children make decisions that parents feel violate their faith or violate their standards, and parents have shame about this. This is very, very common. And so it's helpful to have a group, or at least a context, where we can talk about these issues, we can share with one another, we can put some things on the table, and hopefully we can come to a degree of health and maturity about it. So as I said, we're going to have some teaching time, we're going to have discussion time and homework. And so my questions for this week are these. Why did you say yes to the group? Is something troubling you? Are you losing sleep? Do you have a relationship that is unhealthy for your child or for you? Is your child not flourishing? Are you feeling guilty about things in the past? Do you have regret? Are you being a stumbling block for your child? Is your child being a stumbling block for you? Is your relationship with your adult child creating conflict in other relationships? I've often found that in families there are hosts of interconnected conflicts and relationships. So spend a little bit of time and get some clarity. Why do you want to participate? Why do you want to spend some time focusing on this? If you can answer this question, you might be able to create some goals and say, well, this is what I'd like out of the class. Another thing I'd like to talk about are expectations. 12-steppers often have a pretty apt phrase that says expectations are preconceived resentments. In other words, often we set up our relationships by having expectations, and then they turn, in fact, into resentments, and that will become problematic in the relationship. And so I think it's important, maybe make a list, maybe share with, again, a trusted person. You might share with the group what your expectations are of your child. Expectations will differ broadly in our cultural context right now, where we so highly value equality. One of the things that we actually fail to recognize is that none of us have the same potential. We have potential in different areas. Some of your children might in fact be disabled, and so their potential will look different from your other children. So what are your expectations for your children? It's important to own them and realize that these come from you and might not be shared by them. Are you in prayer over this? Now, for some of you, you might be praying about this constantly. Others of you might not be praying about this at all. Again, I said a few minutes about why I think prayer is important. Talk about your prayer life with someone. Is this obsessing? Is this becoming a problem in your prayer life? Again, if we read the Psalms, we find hosts of things that the psalmists are praying over, and they're praying to God in a very raw, emotional way. Sometimes it's helpful to use the Psalms to pray. So how are you in prayer over this? And do you need help with your prayer life over this? And then my last question for this week is, can you flourish even if your child is not flourishing? Now, there's a saying that says you'll never be as happy as your most unhappy child. And that's, I think, a helpful and in many ways a true statement, but it shouldn't be a command. We should have some differentiation between our emotional worlds and our children's emotional worlds. They are, in fact, separate human beings, and this is, again, one of the things that we're going to have to navigate. So part of what we're going to be looking for in this course is some self-leadership, or we might even ironically call it some self-parenting. We need to parent through adulthood, and for us that might mean growing up ourselves. It's my belief that there are few things in life that cause us to grow up more, in fact, than having children and parenting. And so my hope for this course is that as we talk about the issues involved, that we would in fact grow up. And as we grow into adulthood, we could become better parents and better adults, even for our children. So this is the first video for this course, and I appreciate you watching. Again, if you'd like to come to the class, we're meeting this Sunday afternoon. You can find information on it on the church website. If you'd like to follow along on video and the blog, you can do that too. But we appreciate you watching, and let me have some feedback. I'm making this course up as I go along, and so your input will help me shape upcoming lessons. So thanks for watching, and thanks for your feedback.